Greetings. Today I'm going to be talking about the National Latin Exam and how I used Web 2.0 tools to prepare a lesson plan to help my students get ready for this. So first, the National Latin Exam itself. It's an annual test. About 150,000 students each year take it across the country. It's an exhaustive review of vocabulary, grammar, culture, daily life, and derivatives. So one of the challenges, of course, is that because the exam is so broad, it is very hard to cover all the material in a regular classroom environment. And therefore, what I decided to do this year was to leverage Web 2.0 tools to allow students to use mastery-based learning to figure out material that they've already mastered and then move on their own. And so my job was really to create tools and to make sure they were staying on track, but let students decide on their own learning what their needs were. There were three types of assessment going on right from the beginning. So we have formative assessment, mastery-based, and summative assessment. And the mastery-based one is really the important one. We do something called a verb synopsis. I'll talk about it in a moment. Formative showed up largely in the game-based learning because that was not counted as a quiz grade or a test grade. Instead, it was just an opportunity for students to self-assess and figure out where they were. And the summative assessment for this unit, of course, was the National Latin Exam itself. So each class day would begin by the students taking something called a verb synopsis. A verb synopsis is an examination of Latin grammar verb forms. And the verb synopsis, you do a different verb each day and you do a different person number each day. And we did this, it takes about 5 minutes, and we go over the answers immediately. And students know how they did. Students would take this and it would count as a test grade until they scored 90% or higher. Students who got 90% or higher could then move on to the game-based learning for it, while students who were struggling had different tools that they could use. So, for example, students who were struggling with verb synopsis had a wide variety of tools, largely from UNCG, from QIA, and from Magistrula to help them learn more about verb synopsis and become better at it. So, on the other hand, students who had done well on the verb synopsis and scored a 90% or higher at that point could move on and start going through a variety of web tools which I designed to help them cover things like mythology and history and daily life. And so they could play these games until they hit certain specific scores. And once they hit those scores, they knew they had hit a mastery-based level and they could move on. The game-based learning did allow me to work one-on-one with struggling students more, and that was one of the nice things about this. Cabrera says that students need to be able to look at problems from multiple perspectives, and the nice thing about developing a variety of games is that students could play these games and decide for themselves which ones they knew well and which ones they needed to work on more, and establishing what scores would be successful for them helped them create a guideline for knowing when they knew material or didn't. Similarly, for students who are struggling with verb synopsis, we used YouTube videos. I have play pause it videos, which have embedded quizzes for them inside of it. QIA.com has practice verb synopsis. Magistrula has a fantastic tool which lets you pick specific areas if you're struggling with verb synopsis, and then the classics.uncg.edu has another 40 or so practice opportunities for verb synopses. This allows students who are struggling to get lots of practice and immediate feedback so that we could work with them and say, look, this is where you're struggling, let's talk about how to do that. And targeting their problem areas really let them understand the learning process more. For the students who had mastered verb synopsis, they could use the practice questions on Italy.org. I created purpose games for geography and for Roman colors, things like that. I was using Whisk Online for most of the history game-based learning. I was using cram.com for most of the vocabulary-based learning to expand vocabulary for NLE. Using Quizlet and PlayPause to touch on grammar concepts we had not touched on well enough in class, but they would need for this difficult exam. The instruction plan was basically for students to take ownership of learning, and that's the nice thing about a mastery-based unit. Here we can see the Magistrula tool, and you can see that students could actually click on where their problems were, and it would create practice mini quizzes where they could target their problem areas and get immediate practice and immediate feedback on how they did on it. And this is a really powerful tool to help students address specific needs that they have. Similarly, one of the things that Meyer and Alexander have said is that if a student fears failure, they may avoid the challenge of learning to think critically. The nice thing about a mastery-based unit is that students don't have to be afraid to fail. It's okay if they fail the test. They can try again the next day, and they can keep trying. And as the number shrinks, as more and more students are successful, I can really target my instruction with those students to give them that one-on-one time for the kids that really need it. At the same time, the game-based learning allowed the highest performers to constantly challenge themselves in new and different ways. Uh, the classes were large, about 30 students in my two level 2 classes, and they are mixed. So it's Latin 2 on level and Latin 2 honors mixed together. However, the students chose to be in this class and they are very well behaved. Students could, once they had hit certain goals, they could take screenshots of their game scores and bring them to me for Crusoe, which are their tickets, which count as their participation in homework grades. And highly motivated students really could move through those arcade-style games and shoot for higher scores than the minimum scores I had suggested for them. And that allowed those high performers to really push themselves in different ways. As a result of this, every single Latin 2 student who took the National Latin exam this year got either a silver or a gold medal. This is the first year I've ever had every single student who took the exam medal. That said, there was some translation and other things going along as well in part of my lesson plan, and the original goal was to have students create a video based on their translations. However, I quickly learned that the students who were struggling with the verb synopsis were just getting overwhelmed, and just creating a translation alone was going to be hard for them. So I did pair them high-low, but then I got rid of the Adobe Spark video as a culminating assignment for them so that students could focus on mastering verb conjugation instead. Here are some of the sources that I used as part of my research. Thank you very much for your time.